He built a mansion so quiet you could hear his daughter's pain echo through the marble. Therapists came and left. Hope faded behind locked gates. But one morning, the maid hummed a song from her childhood, and 3 little girls looked up for the first time. The morning began with the sound of machines, vents low and even, a coffee grinder coughing once into a stainless throat, the click of a security feed as it cycled through a dozen immaculate rooms. The house was so clean it could have been a set, so silent it could have been a shrine. Adrian Voss walked through the silence as if he owned it. He did. He owned the glass and the marble and the light that came in at disciplined angles, because he owned the city skyline it looked upon, because he owned so much that people said he owned time. He didn't own the hour he wanted most. His daughters moved like weather through their rooms. Mara, with her long limbs folded around a book she held too close, as if the words were a cave she could crawl into. Lena, with her light, fast hands tapping out a litany of lines from a movie she watched every day, one breathy syllable followed by another, a rope she could hold. Tess, with her tablet pressed to her sternum like a shield, her eyes skimming surfaces to find the place where they would land and feel no threat. He had learned to read the house as a barometer. When the lights seemed too white, when the silence pressed down instead of opening up, when the hallway cameras recorded the soft confusion of steps that never settled. He checked a dashboard on his phone, a private build special to this address that translated therapists' notes into graphs, minutes of engagement, incidents of meltdown, compliance, response to name. The number slid, dipped, rose, dipped again. He could not make them obey. A clock winked into 7:22 a.m. The day staff arrived, a driver, a nutritionist, a therapist whose shoes chirped when she walked, a bright little bird of authority. The chief of staff, Victor Hale, leaned against the kitchen island and said something about contracts, about an investor breakfast, about a headline Adrian should anticipate. Adrian stirred a spoon through coffee he would not drink. "Keep all of it quiet," he murmured, and the word quiet carried through the vents, through the floorboards, the whole machine of the house learning again to swallow its own voice. In a small laundry room that looked like a boutique, a woman folded towels with an attention that blessed them. Thumb to corner, corner to seam. Cotton breathed under her hands like it was grateful to be touched. Evelyn Bay had been in the house long enough to learn its habits and grieve them without scolding. She moved in rhythm. Lights softened when she entered a room. Glass doors were covered with cling film at toddler height. Sharp corners wore foam sleeves that looked, in the right light, like clouds. She checked her watch. She knew the girls' hours the way a drummer knows the hush between beats. 8:05, Mara's reading window. 8:17, Lena circles the kitchen island twice and whispers, "We begin again," from that one movie with the violin. 8:26, Tess taps 3 times on her tablet, then looks toward the living room and away, signaling that she wants to go, but also doesn't, not unless the light is gentler, not unless somebody nearby breathes steady. Evelyn did not breathe steady because training told her to. She breathed steady because she had been the quiet to someone else's storm. A cousin once, hospital bed and fluorescent glare, a mother who sang from the doorway and hoped the song could reach. She placed a hand on the dimmer in the living room. She turned the morning to butter. A lamp near the far wall warmed from blue-white to amber. The fabric on the sofa was a soft slate. She put a cotton throw across it, heavy as a hug. She stood in the doorway for a moment like a priest at an altar, not performing, simply recognizing the real. He built a mansion so quiet you could hear his daughter's pain echo through the marble. Therapists came and left. Hope faded behind locked gates. But one morning, the maid hummed a song from her childhood, and 3 little girls looked up for the first time. It didn't happen all at once. First there was only the humming. Evelyn hummed when she folded. She hummed when she wiped down a table as if the wood had a memory she could polish back into place. The tune was a Wolof lullaby her grandmother used to travel through long, heat-heavy afternoons, open vowels, a rise like a smile, a fall like a hand smoothing hair. It was not for performance. It was for keeping. She wouldn't have hummed aloud if the therapist had been in the living room. She knew the lines that were policed. But the bird-shoes therapist had been diverted by a phone call, Victor had been diverted by a headline, Adrian had been diverted by the math of the impossible. Only the girls were not diverted. Only the girls stayed near the perimeter of the room, ghosting the edges like deer at the border of a clearing. The first look was a flicker hardly worth a story, except it was. Mara's eyes lifted from the page. She was not truly reading, the book making a tent between her and the world. Her gaze snagged on the shape the song made in the air. Not a gasp, not a revelation, just a rise of noticing, a pupil widening, a beat longer held. Lena's hand drummed the banister, and then stopped. She placed her fingertips against the wood the way she pressed them to her throat when she wanted to feel a word leaving. The banister hummed back, just a little, and that made sense. Lena understood vibration. She understood that even hard things could carry a song. Tess did the bravest thing she did all week. She pressed one index finger to her tablet, and then pressed it to the glass of the patio door, and then pressed it back to the tablet, a 3-step pattern she made when she wanted someone to understand the sentence she didn't have yet. Evelyn saw the pattern and smiled without turning her head. She named nothing. She just let the tune, small and private, keep moving. Adrian came to the doorway and forgot to be a master of anything. Often he watched his daughters the way one watches birds one does not want to frighten. He told himself that this posture came from respect. Sometimes it came from fear that any wrong move would bring the silence down like a curtain. Today he watched with his coffee too close to his mouth, his breath held like a man underwater who's just sighted land. "What is that?" he asked, because in his world a thing with power ought to have a label. Evelyn glanced back, not guilty, not subservient, simply present. "A song my grandmother sang," she said, "for rest." He nodded as if he could put the song on an invoice and pay it. The therapist's shoes returned and chirped. "We're ready for drills," she announced, cheerful. "Today we push eye contact metrics." Her cheerful stopped, noticing the room as if it had shifted while she was away. Mara's hands were not fisted. Lena's shoulders were down. Tess wasn't roaming. None of that counted on the dashboard. "Maybe start with regulation," Evelyn said, careful to pitch her voice like a suggestion dropped on a doorstep, not a challenge thrown across a field. The therapist smiled in a way that hid a wince. "We have a plan," she said lightly. "We don't want to confuse them." "They aren't confused," Evelyn said softly. "They're listening with their whole bodies." Adrian watched the exchange like a tennis match where the ball was invisible but the score mattered anyway. "Let's try 5 minutes her way," he said, and it sounded like a concession when it was really a tiny revolution. 5 minutes lengthened. The humming stayed, not foreground, just the atmosphere. The therapist adjusted. To her credit, Dr. Menon, the name on her badge, saw that getting to the worksheet could be a kind of violence if a body wasn't ready. She kneeled to Tess's eye level and asked, "Would you like colors or shapes?" and waited longer than she had planned to wait. Tess pushed colors, then tapped a palette of squares on screen, choosing blue, blue, blue. Evelyn widened the throw on the sofa to reveal its blue stitching and thought, yes. Good. Yes. Lena drifted near the kitchen and touched the edge of a bowl. "We begin again," she whispered, the line in her throat like a charm. Evelyn answered with the next line from a movie, not to overwrite, only to offer a bridge. "We begin again," she echoed, and then added a new word that made the bridge a little longer. "Together." Lena tasted it. "Together," she agreed, but the G snagged her, so she tapped the banister with her fingernail and let the vibration help the consonant across. Evelyn thumped the couch very gently in the same rhythm, and Lena smiled without looking up, which was another kind of looking. Mara hovered between her book and the breathing of the room. The fear in her chest was a metronome. Evelyn modulated her humming to its pace, hardly perceptible. If music is a conversation, this was a listening reply. Mara lowered the book an inch. The print on the page didn't hold her head like a vice. She read the first line aloud, a whisper frayed at the edges, then found the next line, and it came smoother, and then the third line found a rhythm so close to the humming that the two sounds braided. Adrian, who measured everything, felt something measure him. The room organized itself around something he couldn't see and couldn't capture. He put his phone down. He didn't think about the investor breakfast. He thought about how small his daughters' mouths were when they were babies, how his finger felt in their grip. The memory hurt like a thaw. Victor cleared his throat. "We do have that breakfast," he said, a sentence that tried to pull the room back through a keyhole. Adrian didn't move. Victor's eyes skittered around the space, seeking the authority he could stand under like an umbrella. It wasn't there. Dr. Menon observed, eyebrows knitting between theory and wonder. "Interesting," she murmured, as if writing a footnote for a journal she did not yet believe would publish such a thing. "Non-contingent reinforcement via prosodic. It's a lullaby," Evelyn said gently, and Dr. Menon nodded, as if gentleness could be peer-reviewed. They ate at the table for the first time in weeks. Not a full meal, just an apple shared into wedges, 3 little plates arranged so the red crescents didn't touch each other. Tess kept her tablet near, but didn't hide behind it. Lena traced a finger along the wood grain, as if reading a story there. Mara watched the knife move through the fruit and didn't flinch at the slick sound it made on the cutting board. Evelyn hummed barely audible. The house, accustomed to hushing voices, learned a different quiet. Afterwards, the day tried to assert itself. There were emails. There were staff hierarchies. There were deliveries at the gate, the code pinging in a rhythm that annoyed plants. There was a consultant's call Victor put on speaker, the voice so thin it might have been printed. Optics matter, the consultant said. If it gets out that you've replaced clinical protocols with folk, who said replaced? Adrian asked, more sharply than he intended. In the living room, a child's body stilled for a moment at the unexpected edge in a familiar voice. Evelyn displaced the edge without argument. She took a soft scarf from the back of a chair, blue, always blue for Tess, and let its weight slide from hand to hand like a slow river. Tess watched and let her own shoulders imitate the movement. Up, over, down, release. I'm saying, the consultant continued, unaware of the small tremors he had started in a room he would never enter, we should keep experimental approaches to a minimum. Liability, Mara? Evelyn said, inviting, not calling. Would you like to tell me what the book said to you? She didn't say read, she said tell, as if the story had also read her. Mara closed the book and moved toward Evelyn as if toward a campfire. She set the book on the couch and touched the spine with one fingertip, as if to say thank you to the object. It said a door made of wind, she whispered. It was a metaphor the author had tried too hard for, but in Mara's mouth it tasted like truth. A door made of wind, she repeated, and looked not at Evelyn, but past her shoulder where the song seemed to be. A door made of wind, Evelyn echoed, and something in her chest gave way like a locked place unlatched in good light. Sometimes we open those by listening. Tess tapped her tablet with purposeful slowness. More song, please. The device spoke in its cheerful robot. More song, please. Evelyn inclined her head. Not yet. She signaled with her hands. The lullaby later, the hum now. And hummed 2 notes of it like a promise. Tess breathed them in. In his office, a room built to intimidate, Adrian watched all of this on a monitor and found himself embarrassed. Not of his daughters, not of the humming, not of the staff. Embarrassed of the way he had sat in this very chair, as if from here he could parent. He closed the monitor. He walked back to the room like a man who suddenly remembers he should take off his shoes in holy spaces. On the threshold, he hesitated. He wanted to be the father the room could bear, not the father who bulldozed miracles by asking for them on schedule. Do you want me to, he began, and then stopped, and then tried again, simpler. May I sit? Of course, Evelyn said, as if he were asking to join his own life. She shifted a cushion to make the chair's edge less sharp. The gesture was so small, he might have missed it. He didn't. He sat. He let his knees be higher than he liked. He let his heart beat where it was. Lena stood behind the sofa and pressed her cheek to its back the way children press their cheeks to horses, some mixture of trust and awe. We begin again, she said to the upholstery, and to the air, and to the light turning warm in its slow arc. We begin again, Adrian said because he could, because there are sentences you inherit even if you don't know where to file them. He didn't look for her eyes. He let her have the back of the sofa and the sentence, both. Dr. Menon wrote something on a pad, and then set the pad down like a person laying down a weapon. Evelyn, she said, would you be willing to show me the routine you've built? I can incorporate it, if you're open. Evelyn's smile was an invitation not to be ashamed of learning late. It belongs to the girls, she said, but I can show you where they put the bridges. A phone vibrated, an intruder. Victor mouthed, investors. Adrian lifted a hand without looking. The hand said not now. The wordless refusal made him a kind of manager he didn't recognize, a manager who could prioritize heartbeat over headline. He might have been a different man if he had learned earlier. He could still learn now. The day had its frictions. No story worth telling deserves to lie about that. At 11:03 a.m. Gardner's leaf blower flared outside, and the sound knifed the air. Tess startled hard and flung her tablet, and the robot voice, severed from its context, chirped more, as if asking for a chaos it did not want. Evelyn reached for her, not to contain, not to restrain, but to reach and wait. I'm here, she said the 3-syllable rope, and breathed like she was showing a shore. Tess jerked against the air and against the memory of alarms, then found the rhythm of Evelyn's ribs and matched it, ungraceful at first, then true. Victor opened his mouth to comment on safety protocols. Dr. Menon shook her head once, small, decisive, an unexpected ally. "We can make this a learning," she whispered, more to herself, perhaps, than to anyone else. Later, after a lunch mistaken for fuel, after the investor breakfast breathed by without him because the house needed to breathe with him, Adrian walked to the window that faced the city. The glass gave him back his face, then the skyline took it away. He remembered meetings where he bit the inside of his cheek until it bled just to keep from saying what he really thought. He remembered his wife's hand leaving the back of his neck, as if even love had to clock out. From behind him, the quiet scuff of a slipper on wood. He turned as if he had heard a bell. Tess stood just inside the doorway with the blue scarf in her fist. She didn't come closer. She didn't run away. She placed the scarf on the floor between them like a flag, like a bridge, like an answer to a question he had not asked well enough. Adrian knelt, slow. He touched the scarf's edge with his fingertips and paused so she could see the pause, so she could know he respected the border. She tilted her head, then stepped one small step, then stopped. He slid the scarf an inch toward her. She slid it back. He smiled and did not reach. This was participation. This was how they played. Nobody rushed, nobody explained, and somehow the scarf carried more language than the words he used in rooms where men congratulated each other for being fluent. In the kitchen, Lena found a wooden spoon and tapped it twice on her palm, like a judge starting court. "We begin again," she told the metal bowl that reflected her face in the shape of a spoon. She tapped the rim, and it rang a dull, forgiving bell. "Together," she said, and the G didn't catch this time. Evelyn was humming, and the hum filled the room the way a cup fills the hand. Mara came with her book and read a sentence aloud, one sentence only, but she closed the book not to hide, but to hold it. She set it on the table. She put her palm flat on the cover and looked at the grain of the table as if it were a page. "Door," she said, and you could hear the wind in it if you wanted to, if you knew to listen. By the time the sun turned the west wall gold, the house felt different, not because anyone sprayed peace through the vents, but because the air had found its voice. Even the machines adjusted, the refrigerator content to purr instead of whine, the coffee maker finally quiet. Evelyn stood by the sink where she always ended up at day's end, hands in water that ran just barely warm. She kept the hum going, softer now, a halo around a day that would have sounded like nothing to anyone who listened only for noise. Adrian leaned in the doorway and almost made a mistake. He almost said, "I'll pay you double." He almost turned a mercy into a transaction, love into a line item. He heard the almost in his mouth, like a wrong chord, and closed his lips on it. "What do you need?" he asked instead. Not the first time he had said those words in his life, but the first time they came out of him without a contract attached. Evelyn turned off the tap. The water dripped into silence that welcomed it. She dried her hands slowly, as if her fingers were instruments nobody had tuned in too long. "Time," she said, and permission to make the house softer. "Done," he said too fast, and she almost laughed, because that's how men like him did mercy. Fast, decisive, as if speed could make a humble. She let the humor cross her face, so he would know kindness could approach without sarcasm. Also, she added, it would help to stop counting everything that looks like a miracle and start noticing everything that is. He didn't argue. He didn't know how. He only knew that his daughters had looked up today, and not because a schedule demanded it. He knew that his heart had not changed, not yet, because hearts don't flip like switches. But the hinges had been oiled. The door, made of wind, had shivered like it wanted to open. In a bedroom painted the blue of precise morning, Tess curled around her tablet like a cat that finally trusted the lap. Evelyn sat on the rug, back against the bed, knees up, a posture that said she was ready to rise if needed and ready to wait if not. She hummed the lullaby's last notes as if tucking the day in by its corners. Tess tapped, "Thank you." The robot voice tried to make it sound like nothing. It was not nothing. Down the hall, Lena fell asleep with the spoon still on her pillow because she said it was the judge of dreams. In another room, Mara arranged 3 books in a row so the titles made a sentence she approved of: home. Again. Together. Adrian stood at the top of the stairs and held the banister where Lena held it, as if he could feel the echo of her fingers, the echo of the song. He could. The wood hummed a little. Everything does if you're quiet the right way. He went to his office and found the dashboard still aglow, graphs still pretending to be truth. He closed the dashboard without ceremony. He opened a blank page on his screen, and for a man who wrote only when paid to, he began to write. My daughters looked up today, he typed, and stopped there, because sometimes the first sentence is the whole world you needed to say. Then he saved the file and went back down the stairs, moving slower than the man who had climbed them that morning, a man who believed he owned silence. He didn't own it. He could learn to listen to it. Evelyn was putting on her coat in the mudroom, even though mud never touched this house. She looked at him like a person looks at another person when they have both stood near a miracle and agreed not to crush it with naming. Tomorrow, he said, a promise with no terms. Tomorrow, she said, and her voice made the words sound like him already. He watched her leave, and did not watch the door close. He listened instead to the way the hinges didn't squeal, to the way the house didn't swallow the moment, to the way the air held its breath, and then let it out in a long, steady exhale, the kind a body learns from another body, the kind a father learns from a woman who should have been called by her gifts long before anyone wrote her job on a form. In the quiet that followed, he heard the echo of his daughter's pain in the marble, but the echo was fading, overlapped now by something else, a humming so gentle it could be mistaken for electricity if he didn't know better, the music of a machine finally turning human. He let it fill him. He let it teach him how to sit. He let it teach him how to begin again. The next morning the house woke up pretending it hadn't learned a new language. The vents did their whisper, the glass kept its expensive glare, the coffee maker tried to set the rhythm again with its staccato throat. But there was a small change even a camera couldn't measure. The air remembered a hum. Evelyn arrived with a canvas tote that had nothing fancy printed on it, just a faint outline of a church from some street fair. Inside were the objects that make a ritual without anyone noticing. A packet of gel window clings shaped like circles and moons, a stack of laminated cards with pictures and words she'd printed at home the night before, a roll of blue painter's tape, a little bell that made the sound of attention without the demand of authority, and a fabric swatch book she'd asked from a store years ago because colors look softer when they live on cloth first. She set the tote down at the edge of the living room, the way you set a basket down at a river. Then she checked the light, the chairs, the sound of spoon made against a mug. She placed her palm on the wall, as if listening for heartbeat through drywall. The house held its breath, like a child eavesdropping. Victor appeared in the doorway with the look of a man who keeps a lobby between himself and feeling. He held a tablet with forms open, bullets like teeth. "Morning," he said, as if the syllables could be used as a leash. "We need to talk scope." Evelyn nodded, the kind of nod you offer a cloud you cannot stop from raining. "Good morning." "Yesterday cannot repeat," he continued, which is one of those sentences that means nothing and everything at once, because of course every day repeats and also never does. Drills were delayed. Metrics incomplete. Optics. "We'll adjust," Adrian said, stepping around Victor with a coffee he still wouldn't drink. He didn't make eye contact with Evelyn because he had learned that his looking could be loud. He stood where she stood yesterday, by the dimmer, and let his fingers rest there without touching it. 5 minutes, he said to Victor, and again the 5 minutes had the weight of a small revolution. Then drills. Victor didn't object. He filed the objection for later, when he could put it in a memo and look professional doing it. He slid away on polished shoes. Dr. Menon arrived without her bird shoes announcement, in flats that didn't apologize for anything. She had brought a tote of her own, binders, a timer, laminated behavior charts. She set them down and then, as if remembering the house's new grammar, asked Evelyn, "Where should I be?" "Where they can go to you," Evelyn said, "which is different from where you can go to them." Menon nodded, a student with a PhD, learning to be human again. She chose the rug, not the chair. She put the timer face down, so its counting wouldn't stare. The girls did as weather does. They entered on their terms. Mara first, book in the crook of her elbow, like a secret. Lena next, hands to the banister to check its vibration. Tess last, hovering in the doorway, screen against her chest like a mirror she could hide in. Evelyn didn't hum yet. She took out the blue painter's tape and wrapped it around her palm so that the sticky side lifted in a loop like a ribbon. Tess's eyes tracked the loop. Evelyn tore off a length of tape. Rip, a sound like paper teaching itself to be two things, and made a small rectangle on the floor. "Door," she said, and the tape door wasn't big enough for a person, just big enough for the idea. Mara tilted her head. Doors were metaphors, but this one was literal and safe. Evelyn tore another strip and made a rectangle next to the first. "Rest," she said, and set the fabric throw beside it, the heavy cotton like a visual exhale. She tore a third strip, placed it near the window. "Look." Only the word, no command. The house understood. it softened its glare by a fraction. Are those zones? Dr. Menon asked carefully. Transition supports. Bridges, Evelyn said. They choose the bridge. Lena tapped the banister once, then twice, and slid toward the look square like a cat deciding to sit in a sunbeam. She didn't stop inside the tape. She hovered alongside and placed 2 fingers on the window where the condensation hadn't formed. Begin, she whispered to the glass and to the day. Begin, Evelyn answered, and let the hum come out of her like a tide coming back to the shore that always waits. Mara sat on the couch next to the rest square but did not step into it. She placed her book on her lap and traced the title with 1 finger, mapping a safe path from page to breath. Evelyn's hum paced itself to the speed of that finger. Tess stood with the blue scarf twined around her wrist. The scarf had become a language exchange, a way to say more without words. She considered the door square, then the space between the squares, then Evelyn, then the floor. She walked to the edge of the tape and put her toes just inside it. Her tablet spoke because she asked it to. More song, please. Soon, Evelyn said and smiled, showing Tess the plan without insisting on it. We'll follow you. Dr. Menon re-shelved her timer in the tote. 5 minutes, she said quietly to Adrian, but the tone had changed. This was not a countdown, it was a reverence. She watched Evelyn place the gel clings on the window, blue circles that caught the light in watery coins. The circles trembled when the HVAC sighed. Lena's eyes lit. She touched one with a fingertip, as if checking if light had a pulse. Victor reappeared, complaints groomed and ready. We're creating liabilities, he announced, which is a very fancy way of saying I'm afraid. Uncertified staff leading, uncertified. Dr. Menon said, standing not confrontational, just taller than before. We are integrating non-clinical regulation supports that are working. Victor lifted his tablet like a shield. Working is a feeling. Metrics are fact. Mara, who listened differently, looked up through the noise and said a fact without intending to win anything. Yesterday, I read without my eyes hurting. She returned to her page, unaware she had delivered testimony. Victor stared as if a child had joined a board meeting without permission. Evelyn did not argue. She reached for the small bell and held it by its leather loop. Tess, she said, asking permission with her eyes first. May I ring the quiet bell? Tess nodded, a slow dip of chin. The bell made a sound like a raindrop landing on a lake. Not loud. Round. Finished before anyone could flinch. The room took it in and held it like breath between notes. Tess laughed. Not a loud laugh, a laugh like a chest remembering a door. She tapped her tablet, again. Evelyn didn't ring it again. She smiled and sang the next bar of the lullaby under her breath, the vowel like silk. Tess walked to the look square and put her hand over a blue circle. The circle didn't warm, but the light felt closer. Adrian shifted his weight, a man trying on a body that had always been his. How often do you need me here? He asked Evelyn, the question as raw as it was tender. I don't want to break the spell. It's not a spell, Evelyn said. It's a ritual. Rituals can hold more people if the people are willing to be held. He nodded, eyes wet without drama. Teach me where to stand. She gestured to a spot not in the doorway and not in the center, a place with a view of everything but the demand of nothing. He stood where instructed and discovered that leadership sometimes means choosing the place that doesn't look like it. The house lived the morning as if it were building itself a spine. Evelyn used the laminated cards, pictures paired with words, to offer choices the way a river offers many safe banks. Breakfast wasn't eat now. It was apples or toast. Toast. Cut or whole. Cut. Touch or fork. Touch. The process was not slower, it was the kind of speed that doesn't injure. Dr. Menon, blessedly, took notes without letting the notes become the point. We can formalize this, she murmured more than once, and then bit her lip as if to keep from formalizing too early. We can learn it, she corrected herself. Victor didn't vanish. Men like him never do. He hovered with CC lines in his eyes. He emailed a consultant, and then another. He drafted talking points for a future in which the house never learned to sing. He watched Evelyn shift a chair 3 inches to the left and thought, what authority does she think she has? He failed to understand that authority, earned quietly, changes furniture because it changes the way people breathe. By mid-morning, the house had a little weather of its own. A soft cloud over the rug where books lay in a small pile, A breeze at the window where gel circles floated in their thin sciences, a patch of sunlight on the floor where Tess placed the scarf and then placed herself beside it, not inside the door square but near it, a citizen of the borderlands. Evelyn rolled the fabric swatches open like a deck of benevolent cards. "Mara," she said, "what color was your favorite word today?" Mara didn't answer. She pointed to a swatch that was not blue, not green, a strange lake between. "That's door," she said, and blushed at naming it. "Sometimes it isn't there, and then it's there." "Teal," Evelyn said. "Door made of teal." She said it like a spell, and then corrected herself inside. Not a spell, a truth. Lena arrived with a script from her movie. "We begin again," she told the room, and then tried on a new line like a dress. "We begin together." The G came without a snag. Evelyn echoed the new line, and glanced at Adrian, not to congratulate him, but to witness him witnessing. He nodded. His nod said, "I'm here." His nod said, "I'm not trying to fix this moment with money." His nod said, "I want to be the kind of man my daughters can stand near." They tried something brave, because days that begin politely can sometimes open their hands for courage. Evelyn moved to the kitchen and proposed a quiet kitchen hour, words that would look soft and unserious on a plan, words that proved heavy when they landed. "No stainless clatter," she said. "No overhead fan. No blender. A lamp here." She placed a lamp by the fruit bowl and turned it on low, like a night light for daytime. "Smells gentle. Movements slow. One person at a time at the counter so bodies don't crash." Victor almost laughed. "A kitchen is for work," he announced. "A kitchen is for regulation," Evelyn said, her tone so simple it didn't qualify as debate. "We have to decide which kind of work we want." Adrian considered the stainless empire and imagined it softened. He considered investors at tables with noise and saw his daughters swallowing those rooms like seas. "Try it," he said, "for today." Victor typed something that meant temporary, even as he planned to make it mean, an error we survived. Quiet kitchen hour felt like placing a hand on the house's fever and finding it cool. Lena climbed onto a stool and tapped a spoon against her palm. Lighter this time, a percussionist who knows the room has no earplugs. Tess sat in the doorway and watched shadows on the floor like a movie only she could see. Mara slid a plate so it lined up with the wood grain, everything parallel, everything bowed to. Evelyn hummed near the stove, where water thought about boiling. Dr. Menon moved a cutting board without screeching it across stone. Adrian aligned knives so their reflections didn't shout. He cut apples in wedges that looked like moons and placed them in a circle, a ceremony. He placed 3 plates then, after a pause that felt like an exam, placed a 4th for himself and a 5th toward the sink for Evelyn if she wanted. Evelyn didn't sit. She stood like an usher who knows every seat is good. "Mara," she asked, "would you like to serve or be served?" Mara reached out her hand and did what she had not done in too long. She took a wedge for herself first, then placed one on each sister's plate without watching their faces to read a verdict. She was not playing hostess. She was playing family. Tess tapped her device. "Help me." Evelyn folded her hands together in front of her chest. "Sign for I see you," and then guided Tess's finger to the color blue on the palette, a way of asking if the plate should be the blue one. Tess nodded and smiled at the code they were writing that nobody else would ever read. Dr. Menon watched like a scientist watching evidence rewrite a theory. "This can be documented," she said softly to herself, to the profession, to the future. "As consent-led initiation, as rhythm-based co-regulation, as lunch," Evelyn said, because sometimes the name that keeps dignity intact is the simplest. They ate. Not a feast. Not a miracle. Apples and toast, and a little cheese cut into squares, because squares do not make the mouth work too hard. Lena tipped her head like a bird and let the toast touch her tongue, then her teeth, then her mouth took it in. Tess mouthed the wedge and put it back down, and that was fine. The plate didn't judge. Mara finished too, and tapped the table in a rhythm that was almost a lullaby. The lamp created a small island of amber. The house didn't resist it. When they were done, they did something that made Victor's face work hard not to show contempt. They sat for a minute longer, as if the meal continued even without food. "We begin again," Lena said, not because she needed the line to hold her up, but because she loved its sound now that it wasn't a brace. Adrian cleared plates quietly and put them in a bin labeled with painter's tape. Not yet. He laughed at the small rebellion of it. He looked at Evelyn as if to ask, "Am I allowed to be this new?" She looked back as if to answer, "Of course you are. You were always allowed." Afternoon offered its tests. a courier banged too hard on the glass at the gate, and the sound came through as a long, thin scream. Tess startled, body up, breath gone, and Evelyn stepped between her and the door like a tree stepping between a bird and the wind. "With me," she said, which is different from calm down, in all the ways that matter. She breathed like a tide again and waited for Tess to choose the shore. Tess set her hand on Evelyn's forearm and squeezed as if to ring a bell inside a bone. The panic deflated like something remembered rather than something demanded. Victor compiled these incidents into a log that would look sensible to someone who never lived a day like this. "We cannot have random variables," he said aloud to his screen, as if the screen owed him agreement. He drafted an email to legal with the subject line, "Staff Boundaries." He CC'd Dr. Menon out of habit. She replied faster than he expected. "Observing sustained progress. Recommend integrating Ms. Maid's routines into treatment plan," she wrote. "Consent and choice are clinically supported protective factors." Victor added another CC because CC is a way of building a wall when you do not have bricks. Toward 3, the sun angled just right to make the gel circles become little moons on the floor. Tess placed the blue scarf in the largest moon and lay down so that the circle haloed her hair. She tapped her device. Feel, then soft, then together, then looked toward the door, square, as if wondering whether to step in. Evelyn didn't coax. She hummed 2 notes that meant "I'm here," not "I need you to do anything." Tess rolled onto her side and set her foot in the square and looked at her father to see if he would make into a victory or leave in a moment. He left in a moment. He breathed once like a man who didn't want to cry in front of a child, and then didn't care if he did. "Temporary," Victor said firmly into a phone to someone who nodded where he couldn't see. "We are tolerating this temporarily." He straightened his tie and prepared to intercept error. He did not know how to intercept grace. Later, when the house's shadow lengthened like a cat on a windowsill, Evelyn took out the stack of laminated cards and began to make a line on the coffee table. Not a schedule with times. Those were violence if he couldn't bend them. A sequence. Now, rest, read the first card with a picture of a blanket. Next, story, with a book. Then, outside, with a picture of light through leaves. The arrow between them looked like a river that never forgot where it was going. Mara watched the arrow like it was teaching her breath. "Can I change one?" she asked, halting on the bravery. Evelyn slid the stack to her with both hands as if passing a scroll to a queen. Mara moved outside 1 card later and inserted blue from the fabric swatch book. Then outside, she said satisfied, because even freedom wants to know the order of its own steps. Dr. Menon stood close enough to learn and far enough not to crowd. If we document the sequence as child-led, we can present it without sounding like we're just feeling our way. Evelyn smiled. Sometimes feeling our way is how God taught us to see. Dr. Menon swallowed the reflex to apologize for the word God. She nodded instead. When outside came, they did not go far. The lawn wasn't friendly. It had been manicured into a yes that felt like a no. Evelyn led them to the side of the house, where the hedge made a narrow corridor, and the air smelled like rosemary getting ready to forgive. She set her hand on the hedge and let her fingers find the prickles and the soft underleaf. "Together," she said to the plants and the girls and the man who came and did not bring his phone. Lena threaded the corridor with her fingertips skimming the leaves, writing a green sentence along the hedge. "We begin again," she murmured, the line now less a life raft and more a love note. Tess crouched and watched a pill bug fold and unfold, the kind of creature that makes quiet its armor. Mara leaned against the wall and read 1 line from her book out loud to the rosemary, and the rosemary, if plants can, made itself fragrant in reply. Back inside, tired in the good way, they found the house changed by the air. You could call it nothing and not be wrong. Nothing had been moved that you could photograph. But the kitchen had learned whisper. The living room wore a new kind of worn, as if human weight were a design choice. Adrian stood again in the place Evelyn had marked for him. "What you bring," he began, then stopped, because to say it wrong would hurt it. He tried again, not with power, with honesty. "What you bring is what I want to learn." Evelyn didn't make speech. She pointed to her tote. "It's mostly tape and light," she said. "And time." "Time," he repeated, the word large in his mouth. He thought of all the meetings where he'd shaved it thin and called that success. Victor hovered with his injury report written in invisible ink. "We need a policy," he said, "because policies make men like him feel safe." "We do," Adrian said, and Victor blinked, caught off guard by agreement. We'll write one. With Dr. Menon. He looked at Evelyn last, which in this house meant first. With you. Victor's mouth opened, then decided to close. He retreated to a hallway where he could stand under the vent and feel superior to air. Evening came on softly, without the daily argument. The lamp pooled honey on the table. The blue scarf lay like a river that had made it to its lake. Mara placed her book on the table, and then put her hand over the cover, and then lifted her hand, as if lifting a blessing. Lena put the spoon back in the drawer without banging it, and on the way, she whispered to it, "Good job," because she had been well parented by a day. Tess tapped her device and found a new word she hadn't used outside of therapy, proud. The robot voice said it wrong. The room understood anyway. Adrian wanted to speak. He waited, because he had learned the cost of speaking too soon. When the girls wandered toward bed, and the house made the sound of socks on stairs, he stepped nearer to Evelyn and said the sentence he had been building all day without writing it anywhere. "This is working," he said. She nodded once and let him own the relief. Then she, too, added a sentence as gentle as a hand on a hot forehead. "We should put it in writing," she said. He smiled, confused. "Contracts." "Ritual," she said. "A page for the fridge. Pictures and words. Blue hour here. Quiet kitchen here. Door square here. Who sings when I'm not here. What to do when the world knocks too loud. Not for them to obey. For them to trust will happen. I'll have my team," he began and caught himself, grinning like a child caught stealing honey. "I'll help." "You will stand where it lets you help," she answered, turning to rinse a mug without waking the glass. "And you will ask them where the page should hang." He laughed at himself and at the page, and at how much he wanted to do it right all of a sudden. "Tomorrow," he said, making a promise without timelines, the only kind worth living. He walked her to the mudroom, as had become their new liturgy. She zipped her coat with the care of a person closing a book she wants to keep reading. "There'll be pushback," she said, not as warning, just as weather report. "People like things they can count, even when those things don't count." "I used to be those people," he admitted, a confession without punishment. "I still am. I'm learning to be someone else." "Good," she said. "Then when the wind comes, you'll know how to open a door." He thought of teal. He thought of painter's tape. He thought of a small bell and a big silence, and how both could be used as instruments. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt like someone had ironed them before he put them on. He watched her leave, and didn't fill the space with orders. He went to his office and opened a file he had saved last night with its one sentence. He added two more, careful like a man placing a bridge only where the river wanted it. "My daughters looked up today. We ate slow on purpose. The house learned our names." He printed the page. He put a strip of blue painter's tape at the top, because it made him smile, and because that's how you teach a wall to listen. He walked to the kitchen and stopped where a map should go. He stood there with the page and waited for the rightness to tell him where to put it. He called softly up the stairs, "Mara," and when her face appeared at the landing, he asked as if asking a queen, "Where should this live?" Mara came down, bare feet silent as a secret. She took the paper, read the 3 sentences like a poem longer than it looked, and then placed it on the refrigerator door in the lower left where Tess could reach and Lena could tap, and where, without knowing why, every person who walked in would feel their eyes drawn. She pressed it flat with her palm. "There," she said, "door made of wind." He stepped back. He looked. He breathed, the slow kind. He turned off the overhead kitchen light and turned on the lamp. He stood where the day let him stand, and let the quiet not be empty. Upstairs, voices murmured small and satisfied. Downstairs, the page shone quietly in the lamp's spill. And somewhere between the machines and the marble, somewhere between the tape and the light, the house added something to its memory. A woman's hum threading the hours, a father asking where to stand, 3 daughters choosing bridges without being told what to call them. The night closed gently around the new thing, as if tucking it in. Victor sent his email to legal at 9:04 p.m. He titled it Incident Risk Framework. He did not know that frameworks can be built around songs just as easily as around fear. Dr. Menon sat in her car before pulling out of the drive and recorded a voice memo to herself. "Day 2, she said, a smile in her voice she didn't try to restrain. Subjective progress notable. Objective measures pending, but perhaps the wrong ones. Proposal. Co-author care ritual with caregiver. Note to self, humility is an instrument. Play it." Evelyn walked 3 blocks before finding her own hum again, the kind you keep for yourself. She hummed it into the collar of her coat and thought of her grandmother's hands. She thought of her cousin and the hospital, and the way songs teach rooms to breathe. She thought, tomorrow I'll bring the small lamp with the yellow shade. She thought, tomorrow we'll put outside after blue, again if they want it that way. She thought, they're already teaching me. Back in the house, Adrian paused at the refrigerator and touched the page's corner as if to check if words could feel. "We begin again," he said to nobody and everybody and the gentle machine of the home. The page didn't answer. The air did. It hummed like a promise, which is to say it hummed like work you love. The first crack in the new rhythm didn't come from shouting. It came from a ping. Victor's face lit blue in the hallway as his phone announced a message in the staff group chat, a place where people pretended to be professional while confessing that the coffee tasted like tin. Someone had snapped a picture of the living room at noon. Gel circles on the window, the blue painter's tape squares, the lamp turned to amber. The photo wasn't unkind, it just wasn't private. "New Montessori cult," a housekeeper joked, the joke not mean, but not careful. "Uncertified interventions, FYI," wrote a temp from security who wanted to sound clever. Victor didn't comment. He screenshotted. He sent it to his private thread with a consultant whose email smelled like rubber stamps. The consultant replied immediately with a link to a gossip site that ate the rich for breakfast and called it activism. They ran the picture under a headline that had more teeth than truth: "Billionaire scraps clinicians for Maid magic." The word Maid did what it always does in certain mouths. It made a person into a task. The piece did not go deep. It did not need to. It had 3 paragraphs and a tone that got clicks. It quoted no one. It asked insinuating questions about appropriate boundaries. It was, in its way, quiet. Quiet can be cruel. Adrian found out because his investor chat flared like a fuse. "Optics," one wrote, that word again, favorite of men who use glass to mean grace. "We need to get ahead of it." Another, "Is she licensed?" Liability nightmare. Another, "Do you want me to connect you to PR?" He was in the kitchen with the lamp on low, washing 2 bowls like a man who had discovered the sacrament of rinsing. He did not answer the first pings. He answered the last finally, no statement. His finger shook. He placed the bowls upside down to dry, as if the bowls needed to breathe. Dr. Menon saw the headline because Victor sent it to her with a note, "Please advise scope." She felt her stomach tip, not because the article was right, but because it was the kind of wrong that looks tidy in a meeting. She walked to the living room and found Evelyn arranging the laminated cards for the afternoon sequence. "We have a problem," Menon said, voice low. Evelyn nodded, the way a tree nods when wind speaks. "We'll keep the girls steady." "What we have," Victor interrupted from the doorway, smugness keeping his hair unnaturally still, "is a compliance risk. I'm instituting a cooling-off period. Ms. Mbaye, you will limit contact with the children to cleaning duties only until we clarify policy. No humming." "No," he gestured, irritated at the fact that he had no language for what he wanted to forbid, whatever that was. Adrian came in on the last words and felt the sentence like a draft under a door. "On whose authority?" he asked. "On the authority of common sense," Victor said, which is what people say when they want to win, without evidence. "And legal prudence. If this goes wrong, they won't print your name. They'll print the children's." Evelyn didn't speak. She looked at Adrian, and then at the sequence cards and lifted them, one by one, like a person lifting a handful of feathers that had the weight of a heart. She put them back in her tote. She turned off the lamp. The room lost its honey, kept its shape. The change took minutes. In a body, withdrawal is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's the closing of tiny doors you don't notice until you can't get through. Tess stood in the doorway with her tablet and didn't step in. She tapped "More song, please," and then stared at the device as if it had betrayed her by speaking in a stranger's voice. Lena walked the circumference of the coffee table 4 times, and then 6, and then 12, her mouth busy with lines that did not comfort. "We begin again," she said, but this time the sentence had no landing. Mara held her book so tight the corners hurt her palms, and she didn't feel it until later when she saw the half-moons in her skin. Evelyn folded towels in the laundry room that looked like a boutique and hummed into the fabric so the hum wouldn't enter the vents. It didn't help. The house had learned the difference between necessary and ornamental. It knew when the center had been pushed behind glass. Adrian tried to fix it by being present, which is not the same as being useful. He sat in the spot Evelyn had taught him, but he sat like a man monitoring a miracle instead of joining it, brittle, ready to pounce if joy appeared, so he could protect it with legal terms. He said nothing. The silence said everything. Dr. Menon lasted 15 minutes before she cracked her own rule. She walked into the laundry room and closed the door with a soft click. "This is wrong," she said simply. Evelyn folded a towel into a square that would not argue with a shelf. "It is." "I should have," Menon began and stopped. "I can't fix the internet. I can help you get back in the room." "It's not my room," Evelyn said. "It's theirs. I'll stay near until they ask me back." Victor appeared in the doorway without knocking, the way a storm can appear in a blue sky. "House meeting," he announced, as if a family were a staff he could schedule. "We'll formalize roles." They gathered at the table like characters in a play who don't know the next scene. Adrian at the head because chairs have memories, Dr. Menon at his right, Victor at his left, a triangle that tried to pretend hierarchy could make harmony. Evelyn stood because you stand when you know someone else should be sitting and can't. The girls hovered, their bodies a weather report nobody asked for but should have. "We're implementing a pause," Victor said, opening a folder full of words that had been sharpened by other rooms. "Effective immediately, Ms. Mbey's interaction with the children will be limited to maintenance tasks." "Ms. Mbey," Mara whispered, tasting the syllables as if they were fish bones. Evelyn smiled at her from across a sea. "Until an external review can evaluate the appropriateness of her practices." Victor placed the paper on the table, like a judge placing a sentence. "There will be no humming, no sensory arrangements, no unapproved procedural changes. Dr. Menon will lead clinical interactions exclusively." Menon didn't flinch, but something in her face registered the word exclusively like a bruise. "I'd like to note," she said measured, "that what you call unapproved procedural changes produced observable regulation and engagement yesterday. I recommend we document and incorporate, not suspend." "It doesn't matter if it works," Victor said, the naked truth of bureaucracy. "It matters if it's defensible." Adrian stared at the wood grain and saw the arrow of the sequence car in it. He heard Tessa's device in the doorway, "Help me." He looked up. She wasn't asking for legal counsel. "There will be a review," he said finally, voice flattened by the weight he put on it. "We'll bring in a panel. They can observe. We'll show them." Evelyn exhaled through her nose. This is what courage looks like. She nodded to the plan that made her ache. "If they come," she said, "the girls lead." Victor rolled his eyes almost imperceptibly. "Within reason," he said. "We'll need structure, timing, demonstration of outcomes." "They are not outcomes," Evelyn said. "They are daughters." The panel came 2 days later, that vacuum of slow time and fast fear stretching the hours in between until they squeaked. The gossip site had fed the headline to a bigger one. The bigger one had swallowed it and spat it out under a gentler deck, but with the same angle. A foundation board member texted Adrian, "We stand with you privately." He read the sentence 3 times and laughed once without joy. The house prepared like a body before surgery. Surfaces shown. Air filtered. The lamp was in the closet. The tape squares rolled into a tight, apologetic circle in Evelyn's tote. The gel window clings looked like smudges now that shame had borrowed the light. The panel, 3 clinicians with credentials that hung like medals, a compliance officer whose mouth made careful lines, a family services advocate whose eyes look tired in a way that means she is honest. Dr. Menon introduced everyone as if the names could keep anyone safe. Adrian shook hands, the skin meeting skin, without intention. Victor distributed packets with bullet points like bullets. Evelyn stood by the sink, the place where a person can reach water fast. "We appreciate you coming," Adrian said, and meant it, and also felt like he was inviting judges into his kitchen to taste soup. "I want to be clear, this is my fault." The sentence surprised him on the way out. "I brought Ms. Mbey into a role without giving her the authority to be safe. I let the house run on optics. I would like you to see what worked so we can aim it, protect it, and keep my daughters from being used to settle the argument." The advocate nodded once. One of the clinicians, a man with a blazer that fit too well to be kind, said, "We're not here to fight. We're here to evaluate. May the girls lead." Evelyn asked, stepping forward just enough to be heard. "As long as we can document," the compliance officer said. Her tone was not cruel. It was afraid. Evelyn turned to the doorway, where the girls hovered like weather waiting for permission to exist. She didn't call. She changed the room. She walked to the dimmer and made the morning into butter. She took the blue scarf from her tote and set it on the floor like a river. She placed 2 fabric swatches on the table, teal and yellow. She set the little bell on the mantel and did not touch it. She put the gel clings back on the window in a small triangle, blue, blue, blue. Mara came first because words, even when they hurt, are home. She stood at the edge of the rug, not in the circle of experts, not out of it, simply at the border she trusted. Evelyn didn't smile, and did not smile. She adjusted her breathing to the tempo of Mara's shoulder. "What did your book tell you today?" she asked, the question as natural as asking the weather. Mara placed her hand on a book she had brought without knowing why. It said the door made of wind opened when no one pushed. She didn't look at the panel. She didn't argue that metaphor was an outcome. Lena came in sideways and touched the gel cling with a fingertip, then pressed her ear to the window to listen to light. "We begin again," she said to the glass, then turned a millimeter of bravery toward Evelyn. "Together," she added on her own. The sound moved through the room like a small bell rung underwater. Tess hovered, and then walked to the scarf. She set her foot on the edge, felt the give, walked back, looked at her father. He nodded, the nod that said, "I won't make this a victory poster." She walked onto the scarf fully, and then tapped her device. "More song, please." The panel watched. Documentation bloomed. Pens moved, iPads glowed. One clinician whispered prosodic scaffolding into a recorder like a prayer to a God who only understands Latin. The advocate didn't write. She looked at Tess the way you look at someone who is telling you something without words, and you are afraid to miss it. Evelyn didn't sing the whole lullaby. She hummed its outline, the way a person traces a door frame without pushing it open. The sound was barely sound, more like intention warmed into air. Mara's breath matched it. Lena's shoulders loosened. Tess lay down on her side and watched the light coins the gel clings made on the rug. She tapped, blue, then soft, then together. The device said it like a robot trying to apologize. The room understood. "Can we invite eye contact?" one clinician asked, the vertex of a smile that knew it should stay polite. "No," Evelyn said, and made the word gentle. "We can invite presence." "Eye contact is a measurable skill," the clinician insisted. "Presence is a life," she replied. Dr. Menon looked at the panel as if to say, "This is the data. This is the data." She asked Lena, "May I join you at the window?" Lena nodded, and Menon placed her palm on the glass an inch below the gel triangle. "We begin again," Menon said, her voice unpracticed in poetry. "Together," she added, and her G caught, and she laughed and didn't apologize for the imperfection. Lena laughed, the kind that is permission. Mara opened her book and read a paragraph aloud, voice catching only once, and then smoothing out on a current nobody had charted. The paragraph didn't matter. The air did. The room had learned to be the right size for breath to travel. The compliance officer cleared her throat. "For the record," she said, and stopped, because sometimes record is the wrong word. "For the sake of safety," she tried again, "what do you do when there's a crisis?" As if summoned by theater, the house made one. Not a dramatic one, not the kind you put in a movie with violins. A small one, which is sometimes harder because you have to notice it. In the hallway, a maintenance sensor glitched and emitted a thin electronic chirp at intervals that could not be predicted. It was tiny. It was relentless. Tessa's body stiffened like a cord pulled too tight. Lena's script faltered, and she shook her hand as if to shake off static. Mara shut her book because the words were suddenly knives. The panel watched, still as deer. Victor held his breath like a boy sneaking into a room he was banned from, waiting for proof that his fear was the smartest person present. Evelyn moved. Not fast. Precisely. She stepped between the girls and the sound, not a wall, a tree. "With me," she said, not as command as invitation. She placed her hand on her own chest and exaggerated a breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth, not the way yoga videos teach it, the way hospital corridors teach it at 3 in the morning. She looked to Tess and lifted 2 fingers, with, she lowered 2 fingers, me. Tess's gaze flicked to the fingers. She mirrored without eye contact. Air returned to her in pieces. Dr. Menon found the sensor by the pantry, eyes watering from recognizing her own profession's blind spots. She turned it off at the switch. Silence arrived with the weight of a friend. Tessa's shoulders melted 1 degree. She tapped the device with exaggerated care, because care was the thin bridge she could see. "Help me." A pause, then breathe. The robot voice did not ruin it. "Good," Evelyn whispered, and then because the panel would want the part that looks like training, she said for their sake and for the room's. "Deep pressure? Yes or no?" She held out her forearms as if offering a raft. Tess did not climb on. She crawled to the scarf and slid under it, pressing it over her that made her body remember a shape that felt like safety. Evelyn put one palm on the scarf, not heavy, just present. Tess exhaled. It wasn't a miracle. It was a practice. The clinician with the too-perfect blazer wrote something fervent and baffled to himself. The compliance officer's pen stilled. The advocate closed her eyes for one long inhale and one longer exhale like she was tasting mercy. Victor said, too loud, so the maid sings and the children stop crying, and the sentence fractured something that had been fragile and holy. Everyone turned. His face had the look of a man who hates being wrong more than he loves being alive. "Excuse me," he added, not an apology, an annoyance. "No," Adrian said. He did not raise his voice. He found instead the exact volume of a father who has stopped outsourcing courage. The woman who has been doing the care you haven't seen and I haven't paid properly teaches us a language. Either learn it or leave. Silence is loud when it changes sides. The panel didn't clap. They didn't need to. They had work to do in their heads that would take months if they were honest, and years if they were not. The demonstration continued because life does. Evelyn invited choices with cards like tools. Now rest? Story? Look. Tess pointed to rest. Lena pointed to look. Mara chose story, and then, quieter, added blue from the swatch book, smiling at her own audacity. Evelyn arranged the room like a conductor who understands that the best music is the kind where nobody looks at the conductor. The panel asked questions that were sometimes good and sometimes shiny. What is the reinforcement schedule? How do you measure generalization? What's the baseline? Evelyn answered the ones that weren't insults. We're reinforcing safety, she said. We measure trust by how a body returns. The baseline was a house that didn't know how to listen. When it was done, there was no finish line to cross. There was only the residue of a room that had weathered a storm without pretending it hadn't almost broken. The panel collected their papers. The compliance officer met Evelyn's eye and said, "Thank you," quietly enough to count. The advocate touched Adrian's sleeve and said, "Whatever you do next, do it publicly. It matters who people see leading the change." Victor gathered his folders and his face and left the room first, because that's what men who confuse exit with victory do. Dr. Menon stayed behind. She looked at Evelyn, and then at Adrian, and then at the three girls who were not artifacts but persons. "We can build a plan," she said, voice rough with humility. "We can name the ritual as care and protect it in policy. I'll write it." "No," she corrected herself, the most beautiful correction. "We'll write it." Adrian felt the ache of a man who has been brave for an hour and is now afraid he cannot be brave for a year. He nodded anyway. "We'll write it," he said, "and I'll say out loud what we've done wrong." "Not today," Evelyn said gently. "Today we put the lamp back." He went to the closet and took the lamp out, silly as it felt to be a billionaire holding a simple thing like it was sacred. He placed it on the counter and turned it on, and the kitchen remembered honey. Tess sighed with the relief of a body that knows where to look for soft. Lena leaned on the island and tapped the spoon once, then twice, like a heartbeat returning. Mara opened her book and read one line and teared up without panic. "Door," she whispered, and pointed at the place in the air where wind becomes a handle. The day didn't end with triumph. It ended as days do, with shoes near a mat, with dishes soaking, with a tune humming itself into the wood. After the panel left, after Menon, after even Victor's cologne filtered out, Adrian stood by the sink and watched water bead on a glass and roll down, leaving a trail of clean nobody would clap for. He felt the fatigue of newness. He felt the determination of a man who had failed the right way and wanted to keep failing toward the right. In the mudroom, Evelyn reached for her coat and then paused. "I'll come early tomorrow," she said, neutral as weather. "You don't have to," he said, a reflex. "I know," she answered. "I will." He nodded. His voice found a low place it could stand without wobbling. "Thank you," he said for the 1,000th time, and the first honest time. "For letting them lead. For letting me not know what I'm doing, and stay anyway." She looked at him with the kindness that knows the difference between apology and ownership. "We're not trying to grow a reputation," she said. "We're trying to grow a home. Homes take time. And truth." He wanted to say, "I'll protect you." He settled for, "I will stand where you say." He settled for, "I'll fire the man who thinks safety is the same as control." He settled for the courage he had. Upstairs, the girls made their own endings. Lena arranged the gel clings into a new triangle and fell asleep with her palm against the window, listening to the soft hum that now sounded like mother tongue. Mara put a slip of paper in her book that said teal in her careful hand and tucked it under her pillow because dreams like labels too sometimes. Tess took the blue scarf to bed and pressed it over her middle like a sky you can hold. The tablet lay dormant beside her, quiet as a friend who knows when to be. In his office, Adrian opened a fresh page. He wrote, "Today we let the world in, and it tried to name us wrong. We answered with a song." He paused. He added, "I'm learning to be led." He saved the file and didn't share it with anyone. Not yet. The sharing would come later, with microphones and shame and pride and receipts. Tonight, the house needed the lamp and the breath, and the sound of a father not rehearsing but living. On the way out, Evelyn passed the refrigerator and saw the page with its 3 sentences, the blue tape at the top. She pressed the corner flat. It was enough. It was not enough. That's how you know you're telling the truth. Outside, the night air tasted like a pause. She hummed Walking Down the Steps, the lullaby quiet enough not to wake the sleeping, loud enough to remind the world it could change its mind about how to be. Behind her, the house held the note as long as it could. Then it let the note go and held what remained. In the kitchen, alone, Adrian stood with his hand on the lamp's shade, feeling its warmth. He thought of the panel and the questions and the chirp in the hallway, and the way Tessa's shoulders dropped like a flag that no longer needed to fly at half-mast. He thought of Victor's sentence, "Maid," and how small it felt next to woman, and then next to teacher, and then next to the word he didn't say out loud because the world is bad at hearing it without making it cheap. Healer. He turned off the overheads. He left the lamp on. He went upstairs and paused at the landing where the house had hummed through him 2 nights ago. He put his palm to the banister. It hummed back. Everything does if you listen the right way. He thought, tomorrow I choose. He thought, tomorrow I say it on camera. He thought, tomorrow I tell him to leave. Sleep took him the way the song takes a child, not all at once, but with faith. The house, which had once learned how to be a museum, kept learning how to be a home, even under the gaze of people who would prefer it be evidence. In the space between scrutiny and softness, something fragile began to calcify into bone. It would need to break once more to grow right, but was growing. The day after the panel, the house woke up with its hands in its pockets. The lights came on the way they were programmed to come on. The vents breathed because vents do. The coffee grinder did its cough. Everything behaved. That was the problem. Evelyn's tote sat where she had left it yesterday, under the coat hooks in the mudroom, holding tape and swatches and a bell that made a sound like a raindrop when you asked it to. Victor had asked that it be secured until policy could be clarified. He meant stored. He meant hidden. He meant forget. Adrian walked past the tote without touching it because rules lived in his muscles, even when his heart argued. He poured coffee and didn't drink it. He ran a hand along the cool counter and realized how recently he had believed that temperature could measure a life. Upstairs, the girls moved like whether you couldn't predict on an app. Mara came down with a book and held it, but didn't open it. Lena put her cheek to the banister and didn't say her favorite line. Tess stood in the doorway to the kitchen and watched the floor where the painter's taped squares used to be. She touched the tile with her toe like a person checking if a river had a current. It did not. It was tile. "Good morning," Dr. Menon said softly. She looked tired in the way people look when they've told the truth in a room that prefers paperwork. She placed her tote on a chair and took out props that had always seemed important and now seemed lonely. "We could try the sequencing cards today," she suggested, aware of the absence like a pulled tooth. Tess tapped her tablet, careful. "Help me," it said. The device smiled with its fake cheer. Menon swallowed, nodded, and sat on the floor to be eye level with the question. "I can help," she said, meaning it. "We can do rest and story, and," she caught herself offering the world in list form. "And we can breathe first." Mara hovered with the book. She looked at Adrian, then at the lamp's empty corner, and then at the ceiling, which never had anything to say. "Can I read?" she asked, which was not about reading at all. It was a test. "Can we do the old new thing without the person who taught us how?" "Of course," Adrian said, and sat where he knew he should sit, in the spot Evelyn had once indicated with her chin. He tried to make his body learn the quiet that used to come when she hummed. He tried to be a father without performance. He succeeded in being present and failed at making presence into a room tone. That is not a failure worth shame, is a failure worth a teacher. Lena's hands hovered above the table the way a bird hovers above a branch it doesn't trust. "We begin again," she whispered, but the words didn't land. She tried a different line from her movie. It didn't know how to hold her up either. She looked at Adrian, and then away, all in one movement, the human equivalent of static. Victor entered with the smell of a printer. "We've drafted talking points," he announced to the air, which is who he usually announced to. "We're framing this as a learning period. External review ongoing. No comment on personnel decisions." "Her name is Evelyn," Mara said, eyes on her book, voice nearly air. The syllables came out like they wanted to hide behind themselves. Victor blinked at the child who had not asked for permission to speak, then continued, as if the interruption proved his job mattered. "PR wants a statement by noon. I want you in a short video, Adrian. Something clean. We are committed to best practices, etc." Adrian did not answer immediately, and that was the first answer. He watched Tess angle the tablet away from the light. He watched Lena tap the table once, twice, and then, because there was no hum to hold her, again and again until the rhythm turned from comfort to itch. He watched Mara's eyes slide across words and not catch. "We'll schedule the video for later," he said finally, voice steady but not hard. "Not now." He stood up, and his chair made a small sound against tile, the kind that used to bother Tess. Today she didn't flinch. Today she didn't reach. She didn't do either. Menon lifted a card. "Now rest," she offered. Tess looked at it and looked at the floor, a child who had learned to read 1,000 things and had decided today not to read one more. Menon put the card down like a white flag and took a breath that made her eyes shine for a second. "Okay," she whispered to herself, to the house. "Okay." The morning kept going because clocks do not take sides. Menon tried gentle structure. The girls answered with gentle refusal. Not oppositional, protective. Mara read 2 lines and closed the book as if to keep the story safe for later. Lena tapped her spoon against her palm, without joy. Tess stood in thresholds and put 1 foot in and took it out and put 1 foot in and took it out until thresholds learned to ache. Adrian tried to make lunch in the new careful way. He sliced apples and placed them like moons. He set the lamp on the counter without plugging it in because Victor had said optics. The kitchen learned to live without honey for a day. It did not like it. Halfway through a quiet that wasn't peace, Adrian's phone flashed with a headline clipped into a message by someone who thought they were being helpful. The picture was the one from the gossip site, extra large on the screen. The word, Maid, was bigger than any of the girls' names. He put the phone face down like a person putting a lid on a pot that isn't boiling anyway. He kept his hand on it, as if to keep the lid from rattling. It didn't rattle. He could still hear it. By afternoon, you could feel the house asking for something it was too polite to demand. The suggestion arrived in the form of a memory, the little bell in Evelyn's tote, the raindrop sound that had meant attention without pressure. Adrian walked to the mudroom before he changed his mind. He lifted the tote from its hook, felt the weight of tape and cloth, felt the way objects can become liturgy. He carried it back like contraband and set it on the counter, as if setting a small animal free. Victor stepped into the kitchen and saw the tote and made the face of a man who believes he has caught a rule-breaking and not a returning. "We have guidelines," he began, that favorite sentence of men who like doors better closed. "We have daughters," Adrian said, and did not raise his voice. He took the bell out of the tote and held it up so that Tess could see it before she heard it. "May I?" he asked her, because consent is a skill you practice even with small beautiful things. Tess nodded, barely. The bell sounded its 1 round note. The room, struggling to remember how to hear, heard it. Lena's tapping slowed and stopped. Mara looked up from a line. She was rereading and rereading. Menon exhaled, the kind of breath that tells a body there's a shore. "I know what I said," Victor hissed, "but this time his whisper was the thing that felt too loud." "Then say something better," Adrian replied, and even Menon smiled at the corner of her mouth. They made it through the afternoon with grace that looked like stitching. Slow, small, strong. No one asked for a song. No one offered one. They put 3 books on the table and touched their covers and did not open them. They put a blue swatch near the window and did not name it. They left the lamp unplugged and moved toward its corner anyway. When evening began gathering itself in the corners, Adrian told Menon, "I need to step out." She measured his face for avoidance and found only confession there. 15 minutes, he added, the old language of efficiency dying a polite death on his tongue. He drove without the car system turned on. The city passed itself to him in thin lights. He found himself outside a red brick building with a hand-painted sign that said Community Matters in letters painted by hands that knew letters matter. He went inside because not going inside would mean he had learned nothing. Evelyn was in a small room with 5 women around a table. They had clipboards and pens and the posture of people who are usually standing while others sit. She was showing them how to build a soft hour in a kitchen with 1 bulb. Light lower, smells calm, 1 voice at a time, she said, and the women nodded like people thirsty sipping water through a straw. She saw Adrian and did not startle. She finished her sentence. That is how you can tell who knows how to hold a room. He waited in the hall, which smelled like pencil shavings and bleach. When she stepped out, he said his apology in the only correct order. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please come back. He didn't say the word Maid. He said your name. He said Evelyn like a person asking for directions and trusting the answer. I'll come back, she said, and his shoulders dropped like a door unjamming. On one condition. He nodded, ready to sell a building or a theory. Name it. That the house belongs to everyone who keeps it gentle, she said. Not to optics. Not to fear. To us. To them. It will, he said, which is not a legal guarantee, but is more binding if your soul pays attention. And we'll put it in writing so fear has to read it. Good, she said and smiled, and the smile made him feel like a student who had passed a test in a language he used to correct and never spoke. When they returned, the night had reached in through the glass and left fingerprints of shadow on the floor. The girls stood at the edge of the living room, like people at the border of a country where they used to live. Evelyn set her toad on the table and took out the lamp and the tape and the scarf the way a grandmother takes out a recipe card and knows by memory anyway. She switched the lamp on. Honey returned. She tore a strip of tape. The sound was a hymn. She made a small square on the floor. Door, she said, and placed the scarf beside it like a river finding itself again. Tess walked forward first because the body that has been waiting recognizes home fastest. She set 1 foot inside the tape, and then the other, and then touched the scarf with her hand like blessing bread. She tapped her tablet. Welcome. The robot voice smiled. The room smiled better. Lena came to the banister and pressed her cheek to the wood and whispered her line like a password that changes every day and always remains the same. We begin again. She turned to Evelyn, eyes wide but not uncertain. Together, she added on her own, the G soft and smooth, a letter that had been a hill and was now a field. Mara raised her book and opened it and read, not to prove, to share. She lifted 1 sentence and placed it in the room. Gentle. The door made of wind opened by itself, she read, and nobody laughed at the metaphor because sometimes a sentence is true before you figure out why. Menon watched with a face that would have made a good painting, because humility had finally found somewhere comfortable to sit. Evelyn, she said, no degree or title attached, will you help me write the plan? We'll write it, Evelyn said. With them. Victor stood in the doorway with a folder and a frown and a future that didn't have this in it. He cleared his throat to cue his authority and found it stranded. Adrian turned toward him, not aggressive, exact. You're good at building walls, he said. We need a gardener. Excuse me. Victor said, because metaphor always offends those who have invested in literal. You're fired, Adrian translated, and the sentence changed a weather pattern that had been stuck for years. Victor opened his mouth to talk about lawsuits and optics and precedent. Adrian raised a hand like a traffic officer at a parade. We'll be generous, he said. Your history is yours. The house is ours. Victor left a little smaller than he arrived. He would tell the story in a way that kept him standing tall. That is his right. This is ours. They ate a small dinner with the lamp on. Toast apples, a soup Evelyn made by convincing vegetables to trust water. The girls sat in the shapes their bodies liked best. Nobody forced eyes. Eyes came when they had something to do. Adrian's hands learned a new task, washing bowls slowly, not to make them clean, to let the water's sound be part of the room. Menon took notes that looked less like citations and more like love letters, consent-led sequence. Lamp before language. Choose the bridge. After the dishes, Adrian stood in front of his daughters and spoke a sentence he would later repeat into microphones with cameras blinking like insects. We are going to change the rules, he said. In this house. At my foundation. Wherever I have a key, I'm going to open a door. Evelyn will lead that work. Dr. Menon will help. I'll follow. Mara lowered her book to hear it without the page. Lena tapped the spoon, once like a stamp on a passport. Tess tapped her device, together. The voice said it gently now. The room echoed it without sound. Later, when the girls climbed the stairs with the soft drumbeat of socks, Adrian and Evelyn and Menon sat at the table with pens and paper and a tiredness that felt like reward. They wrote the first draft of the Home Dignity Charter in words simple enough to hang on a fridge. Light, soft, chosen, warm. Sound, low, kind, predictable. Choice, offered before instruction. Consent, asked, not assumed. Ritual, co-created, not imposed. Language, all forms honored. Care, measured by return, not performance. Authority, shared with those who do the work. Correction, gentle. Safety first, dignity always. Menon added a line in her neat handwriting. When in doubt, slow down. Evelyn added another in her rounder hand. When afraid, hum. Adrian, in his angular script, wrote, when wrong, say so, then ask what to do next. They taped the page to the refrigerator with a strip of blue painter's tape because some habits are not aesthetics, they are vows. Adrian asked, without thinking about optics, where should it go, and realized he was already learning where to stand. Lower left, Mara said from the stairs, not able to sleep until the page found its home. So Tess can touch it. So I can read it. So Lena can tap it. So guests will ask what it is. Guests will ask, Evelyn echoed softly, not as warning, as prophecy. The night lengthened the way nights do when they are not asked to carry too much. Menon left with a folder under her arm, and a plan that would turn into slides for people who can only learn that way. She paused at the door and looked back and said, thank you, the kind you say when a room saved you as much as you saved it. Adrian walked Evelyn to the mudroom. The tote sat open, satisfied, like a cat that knows it lives here now. He wanted to say every good thing in this house is your fault. He said instead, will you come early tomorrow? I will, she said. We'll practice before breakfast. I'll teach the team how to listen in the doorway. The doorway is where most love gets lost. He nodded, thinking of doorways he had walked through talking too loudly, of meetings that began without anyone hearing anyone. I'll tell the board in the morning, he said. No more waiting. No video about optics. We'll say it plain. Say it like you said it to them, she advised, chin tipping toward the stairs where 3 rooms breathed slow. Say, we are changing the rules. Then show them this page. Then ask them if their houses would be kinder if this hung there too. He laughed, a quiet thing, the kind that says a man is surprised by his own hope. Good night, he said, and the words were not dismissal, they were blessing. After she left, he went to his office and opened a new document. He wrote, without practicing, the speech he would give tomorrow and for the next year, until the world stopped asking if this was a phase. He wrote about unseen labor and the way songs organize rooms. He wrote about measuring care by returns. He wrote the sentence he had been rehearsing in his chest. I confused cost with care. I measured everything but love. He deleted a phrase that sounded like marketing. He kept a phrase that sounded like prayer. He slept, not as well as he wanted, as well as an honest man sleeps the night before he tells the truth in public. Morning came on like a curtain opening in a school auditorium, no applause, just light. Evelyn arrived before the vents found their rhythm. She gathered the staff in the kitchen with the lamp on and the coffee maker unplugged. She showed them how to stand in the doorway with a body that says welcome instead of hurry. She taught them the soft hour, the way a room can hold a person without touching. She rang the bell once, the raindrop note, and told them, this is not a trick. It's a practice. They nodded. Some rolled their eyes privately. Some took notes. Some exhaled like they had been waiting to be told that gentleness counts. The girls came down to the smell of oatmeal that didn't shout cinnamon, just suggested it. Tess walked to the tape square as if she had been born to it. Lena leaned her cheek against the banister as if it could answer. Mara opened her book and read the first line, and then closed it and looked up to make sure someone else had heard it too. We begin again, Evelyn said, as if it were the first time, because the power of a refrain is never really its repetition. It's the way it arrives in new light. Together, Adrian said, and his voice did not wobble. He did not look at a camera. He looked at his daughters. Then he looked at the page on the fridge and touched the blue tape, the small banner of a small revolution. At 9, he stood in front of the foundation board. He left his phone on his desk. He did not bring a PR person. He brought the page from a fridge photocopied in black and white because it would look more like a public document that way, and because color would arrive later in the places that mattered. He told the truth. He did not perform it. We are changing the rules, he said. In my house, in this foundation, in the way we talk about care. We will fund practices led by the people who do the work, caregivers, domestic workers, family members, aides, whose expertise rarely gets a microphone. He lifted the page. This is our first policy. It's simple. It's hard. It will make us better. If you don't want to be part of that, resign. If you do, start today. There were objections shaped like questions and questions shaped like fear. He answered what he could and said, I don't know, where he didn't. He did not say optics. A few members resigned. He thanked them. The rest stayed and signed because sometimes the future happens in a room while everyone is busy reading their email and somehow still gets in. When he returned home, the house met him the way houses do when they learn their people's gait. He put his key down in the bowl that used to ring like an alarm and now made a sound like water. He walked to the kitchen and saw the staff standing a little differently, chins not so high, shoulders not so pinched. Menon was at the table with a laptop, turning the fridge page into a draft charter with language that could make sense to a grand officer and a grandmother alike. Evelyn was in the living room, not humming, just breathing like a song. Tess lay under the blue scarf like sky. Lena was building a triangle with gel clings that caught the light in 3 small tongues. Mara was reading to the room like you read to a friend who knows the story and wants to hear it again anyway. Adrian stood in the doorway the way you stand in a museum if the painting is your own life. He didn't clap. He didn't announce. He didn't list outcomes. He set his hand on the frame and felt the wood hum. Everything does if you listen the right way. Evelyn, he said, when there was a space that could hold his voice. Will you accept a new title? Director of Home Care. She looked up with caution and humor and a love for words that have to earn their keep. Only if it comes with authority and rest and a budget and time, she said. And if I get to hire from places where gentleness is a skill and not a luxury. It will, he said. You do. She nodded. Then yes, she answered simply, and the house learned a new sound for yes, a promise that doesn't need trumpet. They didn't celebrate with a toast. They celebrated by sitting, by eating slowly, by putting the lamp where it belonged and making tea, by printing the charter and hanging it where guests would see and ask and be told the story without anybody being made into a symbol. That night, when the girls slept and the tote sat open and the bell rested and the tape kept it square on the floor, Adrian stood at the refrigerator and read the page again. He touched the blue strip. He laughed quietly at the thought of all the kitchens in the city that could use blue tape like this, not to fix a leak, to mark a vow. He wrote one more line in his document before bed. We do not have a miracle. We have a practice. We have a song. We have time. He pressed save and turned the lamp off and left the room exactly as soft as it needed to be, so that in the morning the house would remember where to begin. The morning did not announce itself with glory. It came quietly, the way good change often does, through a soft hum in the vents and light that remembered to be gentle. The mansion that had once sounded like a museum now breathed like a living room. No one commanded it. The air simply knew what to do. Evelyn was the first awake. She walked through the halls with her tote at her side, not as a visitor, not as staff, as keeper of the house's new language. The blue tape square still waited on the floor, its corners slightly curling from wear. She pressed them down with her palm and smiled. Still holding, she whispered. In the kitchen, she began to set up for the day's first home dignity workshop. The foundation had sent over tables and name cards, but she replaced the stiff folders with mugs, notebooks, and pencils worn soft at the tips. No uniforms today, she told the arriving caregivers. You already wear enough labels. The women entered hesitantly, a cleaner from a nearby mansion, a nanny with kind eyes, a retired nurse who still kept her badge in her pocket. Evelyn greeted each one by name, pouring coffee, offering seats near the window. Dr. Menon stood beside her with a tablet, but closed it quickly, sensing that the real data was in these faces. This isn't training, Evelyn began. It's remembering. Everything we teach here already lives in your hands. Someone asked, what do we do if the people we work for don't want to listen? Evelyn smiled, that deep, knowing smile. Then we hum anyway. Quiet at first. They'll learn the tune. The women laughed softly, the kind of laughter that lets you breathe deeper. Menon added, and we'll write down your wisdom so no one can call it luck. Together, they turned care into curriculum. From the doorway, Adrian watched. He had traded his tailored jacket for a plain shirt. For once, he didn't interrupt. He took notes on paper instead of a screen. Watching Evelyn teach others what the world had called unskilled made him understand how many years of language he had wasted on profit reports. By midday, the room buzzed with stories, not complaints, not manifestos, just truth. A cleaner described how she calmed a client's child by matching her breathing. A cook explained why she hummed while chopping onions to steady her heartbeat. Evelyn wrote each on the board like scripture. Methods, she said, real ones. Later that afternoon, the Foundation's press event began downtown. Cameras glimmered like anxious fireflies. Adrian stepped up to the podium without a prepared speech. Behind him stood Evelyn and Menon, and beside them, the charter taped to the wall. He took a breath that sounded almost like a song. My daughters taught me that silence can wound, he said. But they also taught me that silence can heal when it's shared with patience. I used to think care was something I could buy. Then I realized the richest person in my house was the woman who swept its floors. He paused long enough for the room to hear the hum that wasn't there, but felt like it was. From this day, the Voss Foundation will fund the Home Dignity Initiative, led by Evelyn Bay. We will train caregivers not to replace professionals, but to remind them how to listen. We'll build homes that measure progress in peace. Reporters lowered their pens. For a moment, the sound of cameras stopped. Evelyn spoke next, her voice low but clear. I was never trying to fix anything, she said. I was trying to make a space soft enough for healing to show up. That sentence traveled farther than any press release could. When they returned home that evening, the girls waited at the door, dressed in colors they had chosen themselves, teal, yellow, and blue. Mara held up a drawing, 5 stick figures under a lamp, one of them holding a scarf. She said, "This is us." Tess tapped her device, home again. Lena added softly, "Together." Evelyn set her tote down and opened her arms just wide enough for them to enter if they wished. They did. Adrian watched from the threshold, the same man who had once confused control for protection. His eyes filled but didn't spill. He whispered, "We begin again." And the house, somehow, seemed to whisper back. The next morning the house began to sound like community. Coffee percolated beside softly turning pages, the lamp still poured honey on the counter, and voices blended in a low human chord that made the air less alone. Evelyn ran the first full session of the Home Dignity Workshop. The long table filled with caregivers from all corners of the city, a home aide from Queens, a gardener from Newark, a young mother who cared for her brother after work. The foundation staff hovered at the edges, watching as the lesson unfolded without diagrams or slides. Evelyn drew a circle on the board. "This," she said, "is what every shift begins with. Listening. Before the task, before the checklist." She wrote inside the circle 3 words: ask, wait, hear. Dr. Menon followed, turning the stories into frameworks. When someone hums to steady a heartbeat, she said, that's co-regulation. When a child chooses color or silence, that's consent. The workers nodded, recognizing their daily instincts being given names that dignified them. At the back of the room, Adrian took notes. It felt different from boardrooms. There was no agenda, no clock. When Evelyn looked up, she caught his expression and smiled, the quiet pride of a man learning to be useful by standing still. By afternoon, the mansion's courtyard had become a small campus. One group practiced communication through gesture, another discussed sensory lighting. A banner hung from a balcony in plain blue letters, the Family Dignity Initiative. No logos, no slogans, just a promise. News outlets began to tell the story differently now. The same reporter who once wrote made Magic return for follow-up and found no scandal to photograph, only a circle of people teaching patience. Her headline read, "A billionaire learns to listen." Evelyn laughed when she saw it. "Progress," she said, "is when they get the verb right." That evening, Adrian stood again at a podium, this time in the foundation atrium. The walls displayed children's drawings instead of quarterly charts. He spoke simply. We changed our metrics. From profit to peace. From output to belonging. He turned to the audience of donors and executives and gestured to Evelyn beside him. Leadership isn't about volume. It's about who you hear when everyone's quiet. Applause rose, polite at first, then sincere. Cameras clicked, not as weapons but as witnesses. Cut to home, the girls at the table under the lamp's honey light. Mara writes a small poem on teal paper, door made of wind, open again. Lena hums under her breath, echoing Evelyn's rhythm. Tess taps her device, music please. Adrian picks up the tune, off-key but confident, and laughter replaces applause. Later that night, the staff clean up after the workshop. The lamp stays on. The blue tape square glows faintly under it. Evelyn stands by the refrigerator where the charter hangs, now laminated and annotated in 3 different handwritings. She traces the line that says, "When afraid, hum," and smiles. Adrian enters quietly, carrying a tray of tea. "Full house today," he says. "I had to park down the street." She chuckles. "Good problem." He studies the charter. "Do you think it'll last?" "If we keep listening," she answers. "Yes. Listening doesn't expire." He nods, setting the tray down. "You've turned my company into a classroom." "No," she says gently. "You turned it into a family." The lamp flickers once, as if agreeing. Upstairs, the girls are half asleep. Their breathing fills the corridor, like a soft metronome. Evelyn moves to leave, but Adrian stops her with a question. "What's next?" She considers. "Teach more people to hum," she says. "And rest when I can. Change needs naps." He laughs, the sound unguarded. "I'll fund those naps." She points at him, smiling. "You'll take them too." The scene widens to a montage, caregivers in a community center practicing the quiet kitchen hour. A nurse in another city lowering the lights before a session. A child somewhere taping a blue square to the floor and telling her parents it helps. The foundation website displaying led by Evelyn Bay under the initiative's title. A boardroom where a new member reminds the group, ask first, then listen. The music is the same Wolof lullaby, slower now, filled with new voices layered on top, many accents, one rhythm. Back in the mansion, night settles like a soft quilt. Adrian reads emails on his laptop, messages from workers thanking him for scholarships, families sharing photos of small blue squares in their homes. He closes the laptop and instead writes a short note to himself. "We do not have a miracle. We have a practice." He tapes it beside the charter. Evelyn appears in the doorway with her coat. "You're still working?" "Just writing reminders," he says. "Leave some space," she replies. "Tomorrow might have its own sentence." He nods. "Good night, Evelyn." "Good night, Adrian." She leaves. The door closes softly, the sound exactly like trust. The final camera move drifts toward the refrigerator. The blue tape, the handwriting, the drawing of the 5 stick figures beneath a glowing lamp. The hum rises faintly, no melody now, just a shared vibration. The house listens.